Hello everyone. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for supporting me. I have another 10-minute watercolor painting video for you today, and admittedly it's actually more like a 12-minute watercolor painting. I fudged the time a little bit, went just a few more minutes or a couple more minutes, but I figured it was close enough to 10 minutes that hopefully you all will forgive me. But essentially the point of this series is for you to complete a painting in a relatively short amount of time. 10 minutes is not that much. So since this painting runs a little long, I won't spend too much time on the intro. If you want to follow along, fantastic. If you just want to watch, this is a real-time video, so it gives you a sense of what you can do in a relatively short amount of time. Let's jump right in. I did pre-mix my colors on this, so you will see my palette already has the paint mixed on there, so that will also take a little bit of time before you actually begin your painting. And I realized I had started out, I'm so used to grabbing my round tip brush that I started with that, and I hadn't intended to. I'm using a slanted flat brush for this, which is really great for the subject matter I'm painting. So I'm doing a forest type landscape, or a treescape if you will. And this is my second round doing it. The first time I just have to realize with these 10-minute paintings, less is more. So these are really great practice for me to realize that you're not necessarily going to get a whole huge landscape or painting done, whatever your subject matter is. So I had started out with doing each line of trees very faded in the background and getting more saturated color the closer in front of the lines of trees, just like a regular mountain scene. And then I realized, that's just not going to work because there's just not enough time in 10 minutes to do that. You have to allow drawing. So there is one point here where I did pause the timer and I paused the video, and it took about, I would say, 4 or 5 minutes to allow some of that background to dry, because I did want a little bit of detail for the branches on the trees, particularly the last tree I add that has the most detail. It's the biggest and closest to the front. So yes, again, I'm fudging the time on this a little bit. So the total painting time is around 11 minutes, 40 seconds, so almost 12 minutes. And then there's a little break in there for the drying time. But again, that's still less than half an hour. So you can get something done in a decent amount of time. And there I'm just lifting it because I wanted to have a drip effect. So there's a lot of water in that paint. It's very diluted. And so I just lift up my watercolor pad and sort of smacked it so that the water would drip and have that fun effect. So this was actually very freeing for me, just to, again, watercolor has sometimes just at its mercy, and you can certainly do a lot to beat it into submission, so to speak. But when you're working really quickly, actually, if you just let it do its thing, that can really benefit you. So very light washes of color, working wet into wet and letting the colors just flow in and sometimes they create almost a branchy effect all on their own. So, and then just going in and adding more layers. The way, I think it was the time of day I painted this, it was actually fully night, so there was no natural light coming in. It's all just my light overhead in the studio. So I apologize. There is quite a glare there, I think, because there's no outside light from the window, no sunlight coming in. So there will be a little bit of a difference between what you see during the painting because of some of that glare with the wet paint and the final image, which I scanned with my scanner. Obviously, when it's dry, it's much more matte and you don't get this shiny, wet look to it. So I apologize for that. There are parts of the painting that actually have come out much darker. So if you are painting along, really don't be afraid on some of these dark areas like I'm adding right here to really push some of those shadows and those darks and just add fun pops of color. I did look at an image from unsplash.com as a basic reference, more like an inspiration in this case, because I realized after that first version of the painting I did, I realized that I had to be a lot more subject to, I was the creator here. So I had to, you're not stuck to the image. It was a lot more free form than what I typically do. So I hope that makes sense. When you have a reference image, you can choose to stick to it as closely as possible. If you want it to be a very realistic painting that looks very much like the photo, then absolutely you will want to go that route and really make sure your proportions are accurate, that you've mixed colors that match as close to the original image as possible. But in this case, it's fun to push some of those contrasting colors a little bit. Obviously, most trees aren't going to be quite that tealish blue. So you have liberty to be creative here. So that right there, that transition, I had let it dry. So you can see those colors are fairly dry now. And now I'm going in and adding the biggest tree, which will probably have the most detail and therefore took the most time because I wanted it to be more saturated with color and also just have a lot more shadows. I realize I haven't talked too much about the technique I'm using for the actual painting. So the way I'm holding the brush, it actually probably looks like a thin brush, but there you go. You can see every once in a while the way I turn it. It is actually a flat brush, not a very large one, but it has a slant to it. So it's not just straight across, it has a slant. So it's very nice. You can use that very corner tip to get a fairly fine line for some of those thinner branches and the sort of center trunk as your basis. And then when you turn them on, so where you're using the bristles themselves, that's how I'm getting a lot of that branchy type texture. And a lot of sort of dabbing, like just gently sort of blotting it on the paper and then lifting back up really quickly. Again, that will help you get the texture. A little bit of branchiness. Again, your paintbrush itself has bristles, so take advantage of those. You don't want to overload your brush with too much paint when you're trying to get, take advantage of those bristles, because if it's too wet, of course, all your bristles are going to flow together and not really create any texture. If you have a little less water and a little more paint and you dab on your page, you can see some of those sort of branchy, wispy bristles, and they create the texture for you. Adding a little bit of variation of color, I like that sap green. So the majority of the colors I used in this painting are up on that upper left side of my palette. So there is hooker's green, I think a forest green, if I recall it being called that, and the sap green is this more yellowy green I'm using right now. I also use a little bit of raw sienna, and I think there's some yellow ochre I use as well. And of course, Payne's gray is great for shadows, so I use that a lot. And then the ultramarine blue is really lovely for adding some of those teal tones over the green. There's some nice deep shadows, and those will, again, in the final image, come through more clearly. Again, because of the time of day and the lighting that I had, there's a little bit of a glary effect on here that isn't quite capturing the color the way it ultimately turned out. So you'll get to see that at the end of the video. Oh, and there is a little bit of burnt umber in there, that dark brown. Just remember when you're painting something, especially from nature, it's never just one color. You know, it's not just going to be a flat green. You'll have your browns, you'll have maybe even some blues in there, you'll have yellows, you'll have grayish colors, and so you can really play around with different types of color that you might like. Obviously, you think of a tree, you think green, but don't think only green. There's going to be variation of color in there. So I'm adding the signature because I saw my timer and was realizing, okay, we're almost at 10 minutes. I better put a signature on there. So really right about, we're almost there, like right here is pretty much the 10-minute mark. And I said, what the heck? I want to push some of these shadows a little further. So I just kept working. And so I went for about another minute and 40 seconds and was able to get it to just about the place I wanted. So again, 10 to 12 minutes. That's pretty close. I want to add one more little kind of tree in there. There you see some of that ultramarine blue. And some of these, again, you're working fairly quickly, but this might be something that you feel happy enough with. I mean, you could scan it and make a card out of it or something, or even just give it as a little gift to somebody, or if you have a website, post it on your website if you feel proud enough of it. And you can clarify on your website or wherever you post things, or even if it's just sharing with friends in person, you can tell them, I did this in only 10 minutes. People, I'm guessing, will probably hopefully be impressed by that. But if not, you can just say, this is what I have time for right now, and mentally build yourself up to some of those longer projects. I know I've personally been doing these 10-minute paintings for you all because it's what I've had time for. I have another job that I do during the day, so sometimes it can be hard to get the energy or the time and the motivation to do a longer project. So in the meantime, at least you are doing something. Almost done here. So there we go. That's the final piece. And then here's the scan of it, which is much more accurate to the way the colors turned out. I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching and supporting me. Please like and subscribe. I hope you hit that bell so you know whenever I post a new video. I will see you in the next one.